You're tuned into The Collective Voice, thought-provoking interviews co-hosted by young adults, fostering deep faith through courageous questions. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello and welcome to the 787 podcast, The Collective Voice. I'm Cece and I work with Reverend Phil Dickey. And today we have a special guest with us, Reverend Sean McDonald. And Phil's going to introduce him and share a little bit about the exciting work he is doing.
Yeah, I was trying to think years, Sean. I've known Sean probably we're coming up on 10 years, I think now. Has it been that long? I mean, you started working at Highland Park back in
2019 was when we moved down. So that fall.
Yeah, not quite 10 years, but what is time these days? And there was a pandemic in the middle of it, so that extended a whole lot of time. But anyway, so when I was serving at Highland Park, you came and started working at Highland Park as well, United Methodist Church, and now you are United Methodist pastor, and you served the last couple of years at Munger Place United Methodist Church. And some big news, you're going to go do a church plant for our conference coming up soon, so we will get to that here shortly. But we would just love if you'd introduce yourself to our audience, and just so anything that you want to share with them that is useful, or what's a hidden talent that you have, or anything fun.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, thank y'all for having me. This is really cool, and I'm excited to talk about all those things that you just discussed. But I'm a guy from Virginia. I grew up at Round Hill United Methodist Church. It was a small rural church, and that was where I first experienced my call to ministry.
Nice.
Actually, it was driving home with a buddy who was tutoring me in math. And he started talking to me about where his pastor went to seminary. And I don't know what it was about that conversation, but I had never thought about that being my pastor's career, or that was an option. And there's just something about that. The Holy Spirit worked through that conversation, and it made me go, that's what I'm supposed to do. It was sort of the weirdest thing. And, I kind of kept it quiet, because it's like, man, once you say it, it becomes real. Like, hey, I think I'm supposed to be a pastor. And I kept it quiet for a little bit. And then eventually I was like, Mom, Dad, I think I want to be a pastor. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. We can see that. And it's like, okay, that was very reassuring. And then I started talking with my pastor, and he sort of said similar things. And he was actually like, well, let me know when you want to preach. I'm like, whoa, like I just figured this out.
That's
this
a big
might be what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was very reassuring. It's like, okay, if other people are seeing this call in my life, maybe that really is what I'm supposed to do. And so I continued to discern all through high school, and then went to Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia. And I chose that school because they had what was called the Bailey program. And it was like a pre-ministry program. And so I met with other young people who were discerning a call to ministry. And it was great because it kind of got my foot into the door of what 4-day ministry might look like. Now, like I said, growing up, I was in a small rural church. When I said I wanted to be a pastor, it was the only example that I had was my pastor growing up. And it was him and my grandmother as his assistant. And so that was what I always thought I would be doing. And then when I decided it was time to go to seminary, came down to Perkins at SMU, my first job down here was at Highland Park BOC, which, like, you got Highland Park on one far end of the spectrum, and in my church growing up on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And I remember sitting in the sanctuary at Highland Park very first time, and I was just like crying, because I was like, how am I ever going to fit in here? This is so different than anything I've ever experienced. Like, I'm going to get chewed up and spit back out here. But I had great people who came alongside me, who took me under their wing, who supported me. And it was really cool to get to see ministry in different ways. Like we sort of had a youth ministry growing up, but not really. So like, I didn't know youth ministry was a thing in that capacity, or college ministry. And so it really opened the doors to say, where do I feel God calling me? And so anyway, long story short, started in college ministry, working with Andrew and Sarah Beer, who were great. They really taught me how to be hospitable. I mean, they were just masters at being hospitable to this college student, and then ended up stepping into a high school pastor role, which is funny because if you had asked me at the time, what's the one area of ministry you don't want to go into? It was youth ministry. And admittedly, that was the case because it's just sort of, I say I was an arrogant seminarian of like, oh, I don't want to go to youth ministry and not use any of the stuff that I'm learning. And man, did God prove that wrong so fast.
Shout out
Youth
God.
ministry was, yeah, youth ministry was like where I had to take that stuff that I was learning and actually make it really mean something, to be practical in a really clear way. And so that was huge for my development. And then one day I got a call about an opportunity over at Munger Place Church, which at the time was the campus of HPUMC. I got to step into the youth director role over there. This was also the time when I was becoming clergy. And it just gave me that opportunity to grow and develop and take on more responsibility. And so that leads all to where we are now of planning a new church in the Bishop Arts area. And it's really exciting. It's really scary, but I really believe God's been preparing me for it. So I'm just blessed to get the opportunity to do it.
Wow, Sean. I love the coalescing of your life and your call. And I love that, like, you're talking about math on the drive home, and all of a sudden, like, a call is placed on your life in that way. I heard a lot about transitions and your development, right? From being even naming like what you want to do out loud to the formation. And you're sharing a lot about those transitions. But there's one piece that really stuck out to me where you said, I was sitting in this big sanctuary at a new church, unlike anything I've ever been in before, and I was just sobbing, thinking, where do I fit in? And
Mhm.
Anna and I had a very similar experience my first Sunday on my internship year in a church that I did not know and did not feel at home in and felt lost by. And it was tough. And so I wonder if you can also share however you want to, right? Like as comprehensively or not, about how some of those transitions impacted your life of faith, not just your call, not just your role and your leadership, but like you as Sean McDonald, child of God.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually something I've been reflecting on a lot in this season of transition, where I think my call to ministry has actually been relatively easy from the perspective of God has always opened doors for me. I know people, especially people that I talk to in seminary, where they're like, man, I just don't know where God's calling me. I don't know what my next step is supposed to be. And that just hasn't been my experience. I'm very thankful for that. But where my call has been maybe difficult or formational is that it hasn't always been, it stretched me. That's probably the best way to put it. Moving from Virginia down to Dallas, that was just a big transition in and of itself. And then to go from the church that I grew up in, and even the church that I served in college was very similar to the one I grew up in. So then to come to HBUMC, it's kind of like, man, okay, this is very, very different. And I don't know what to expect. I don't know what ministry looks like here. And so I just need to trust that God is going to continue to develop me along the way. And so it was, the door was open, and all God needed me to do was step into it. But where my faith had to develop was, okay, I may not feel ready for this, but God's going to continue to walk alongside me in that process. And like I said, God has continued to shock me and surprise me in that in all of those transitions, God has sent someone or multiple people who has partnered with me, taken me under their wing. And that has always made the transition just so much more fruitful and so much more developmental for me, to where you look back and you go, oh, wow, maybe I didn't realize it was happening, but where I am now compared to a year ago, 6 months ago, whatever it is, I'm not in the place that I was. And so that to me points to God's faithfulness to say, I'm going to open the door, just walk into it, and I'll help you get the rest of it figured out.
we commissioned a study a couple of years ago, and one of the things that came up with young adults a lot in this season of transition and as they're seeking belonging and all these things is just the value and role of mentorship. And like it was something that kept coming up even though we didn't have questions about it that we were asking. Like it just naturally came up, and this desire to have mentorship, and how just important it is, because we all know, like, right, life can be hard in general, much less ministry and much less just, making it through young adulthood. So love that you called that out and just recognize that there are people in your life. And I'm hoping there will continue to be those people, like as you move into this new space. And it's really cool being in a position where you have been too, because you get to see both sides of it, because doing youth ministry, I did youth ministry for like 6 years too, right? Like you end up getting to kind of be a mentor to people as well, while you're also having to like seek out mentorship from others and just kind of being in that middle space. And, I think that's also the hope, is that you'll always be able to be receiving while also sending forth in the mentorship space there. But you mentioned, sorry, before we put anything else you want to say about mentors? Because I do think that's a really big deal for a lot of young adults.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add is that it's been cool to see the way that the people that God has sent I can look back and say, man, I learned that thing really well from that person.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, Andrew and Sarah Beard, they were so good at hospitality. And I still use some of the things that I learned from them 7-8 years ago. And then I think about my time at Highland Park in the youth ministry with Reverend Chelsea Petticourt. I mean, she was great at teaching me the organization and the attention to detail and some of those things that make that youth ministry there so special. But even going all the way back to the pastor that I served with in college at Kenwood UMC, Reverend Dan Kim, he's someone who still I talk with often, because he's just
awesome.
A spiritual leader of mine. If I have a pastor, it's him.
Yeah.
And he was just so good at teaching me about some of the more spiritual sides of being a pastor. Don't leave behind the fact that you are also on this journey of faith development. And he was always so good at causing me to stop, ask reflective questions, and try to understand what God is saying to you in the moment. And so as you're going along your ministry journey, and this would maybe be my advice to other young people who are stepping into ministry, understand that God is going to send people to you, and there is something that you can grow in from that person all along the way that you will take with you for the rest of your ministry journey. Yeah. And so don't maybe be looking for one person who's going to do all of the things for you. Have a village around you of people who you're going to take different things from and apply it to what your ministry is going to continue to look like for the rest of your career.
That's a really good word. I like that a lot. Yeah. To not expect it to just be one person, I think, is a really important thing. Yeah. You mentioned, the hard, like one of the harder pieces about being in seminary was then like taking it and making it practical, specifically for youth, which God bless all youth workers. That's all. Let's just take a moment to take a deep breath and say, God bless you. I will say,
amen.
The last church I served at, we were in a transition from having no children's ministers, so I had to like step in and do that for a while too. And I was like, oh, this is legit the hardest thing I've ever done. Like again, my theological mind that loves to like have deep conversations around, all kinds of great ologies or whatever, then I was like, okay, now make it practical for a third grader. I was like, oh God.
Yes.
So would love to know, pull the veil back here a little bit. What were some of the concepts that like you really wrestled with to make practical specifically for youth?
That's a great question. Well, here's the thing that made me go, oh, this is going to be more challenging than I thought. And I will certainly use this theology working with young people. We were on mission trip, and this was before I was actually full-time. This was like, hey, our youth ministry needs help. Can you go on the trip? Like, sure, okay. And we're sitting on the work site, and one of the rising seniors, he goes, Sean, what do you think the meaning of life is?
This is why we love mission trips, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I stopped, and I'm like, okay, is he just trying to get out of work right now? Like, is he just trying to start a deep conversation so he doesn't have to keep gardening? But either way, we started talking about it, and it kind of went back and forth. And I looked up and I realized that all the other students were circled around us and they were listening to this conversation. And one of the rising eighth grade girls or seventh grade girls, maybe at the time, she raised her hand and she says something. And I was like, I didn't know seventh graders thought like that. And so that was what made me go, okay, they're thinking about big theological concepts. They're asking really good questions and they have things to say about this. Like this wasn't just them listening to me. This was a true conversation. And that's when I really was like, okay, youth ministry is something I'd be interested in being a part of. And so that started that journey of all of those things that I'm learning in seminary, but also those things that we hold tight to as our Wesleyan traditions. You know, how do you explain the Wesleyan way of salvation to, yes, seventh and eighth graders and especially high schoolers? And how do you make that practical for them? It's not helpful to just get a whiteboard and say, all right, here's the Wesleyan way of salvation. It has to be something that they carry with them in school and on their sports teams. And when they're faced with difficult paths that they can go, you know, do I go to that party? Do I not go to that party? You know, all of these questions that they're wrestling with anyway. How do you take that and make it practical for them? And so that was what youth ministry really helped me to do. And I'll tell you, you probably already know this, I still use that when working with adults. I think that's one of the things that I hear most in terms of positive feedback about my preaching and teaching. Wow, you make it so applicable. It's something that applies to my life in a way that it's not just head knowledge anymore. And so that's why I'm so grateful for that season of my life that was spent in ministry, because it helped me communicate about these big theological things in a way that actually impacts people's lives.
I love that. And as someone who was deeply formed by youth ministry, shout out to my youth minister, Bree. Oh my God, love her so much.
This episode brought to you by Youth Ministry.
But seriously, sponsored by Progressive Youth Ministry? Question mark?
Oh, there we go. That's good. Yeah.
But yeah, and have had the experience of trying to teach fourth through eighth graders confirmation in the Lutheran Church, describing like the theology of the cross and explaining it and being like, it's going right over their heads. And one of them's like, oh, that makes sense to me because when I was a baby I had cancer. And I was like, oh Lord, right? Like, yeah, I know what that's like because like I went through it. You never know what they carry in their little brains and bodies. But
Yeah.
something similar you were saying, something about what you were saying also felt relatable to me for this season of your life, right? Where that experience with that rising senior talking about what is the meaning of life, and then a seventh grade, eighth grade girl shouting out something, and then you being like, oh no, like they actually have these deep thoughts, they have these yearnings and curiosity. And I wonder, is that similar at all for this like next phase of your life with this young adult ministry or young church plant, whatever that's going to look like? Where you said a little bit when we were kind of getting up for the podcast to start. So I'd love for you to fill in our audience about what that's going to look like. But, you know, you said something like, you know, I finally raised my hand because if I didn't do it, like who else is going to speak for them? Kind of like that seventh grade girl, right? Who she raised her hand, and if she didn't, who else was going to speak for her or for people like her?
Yeah, my desire to church plant stems from a deep love for the UMC and wanting to see us step into, I don't know, a new era of what our denomination looks like. You know, there's no secret that just when you look at numbers, the denomination has declined. Now, disaffiliation plays a major role of that, but even take that out of it, you know, and I want to see us to continue to be a denomination that makes impact on people's lives, that helps them understand the radical and transformational love and grace of Jesus Christ. And I want us to be able to do that in a way that reaches young adults and young families and unchurched and dechurched people, people who are deeply skeptical, people who have been hurt by the church, people who are disillusioned by organized religion. And our churches have to be ready and prepared to reach those people because there's so many of them out there. But what are we doing to actually connect with them in a way that they'll truly be open to understand that grace and love that God already has for them? And I'm fascinated by the trends that we are seeing in Gen Z, where it's like they're coming to church. I think at this point they're coming once every 2 times a month, pretty close to that, which is more than any other generation ahead of them. And so God is doing something in Gen Z. The question is, are our churches ready for them? The issue or the challenge that I see a lot of young people face, again, going back to my youth ministry days, I viewed my job as getting them ready for the 13th grade. Whatever came after high school graduation, I wanted to see them continue to go on and be in a deep relationship with Jesus Christ. So I'd always catch up with students on Christmas break or summer break and be like, so tell me, where are you going to church? Like, how's that experience been? And so many times I would hear them say, well, I went to the large non-denominational church because it had great preaching and great teaching, but I didn't necessarily align with the theology, and I felt a little bit more like a number. And so they would also go to the local UMC because that's what they grew up in. And they're like, well, I didn't fit in because I was much younger than other people and they weren't playing the music that I listened to on Spotify. And listen, that's not to talk bad about, UMCs or large non-denominational churches. Both are doing great work within their context. But the problem is we've got a generation that's in the middle going, is church for me? They clearly want to come to church, right? The data shows that God is doing something in their hearts. But do we have churches who are ready to meet them where they are? And so, of course, we hear Bishop Signs and we hear the conference and really, I mean, I've never heard somebody say we don't want to reach young adults. But the question is, what are we doing to actually reach them? And so I think God was just stirring my heart to say, well, Sean, go do something about it. Raise your hand, put yourself out there and say, hey, if this is something the conference is interested in doing, I would be happy to lead that charge. And so that did kind of start conversations with members of the conference and say, hey, I feel God calling me to plant. I don't quite know what that looks like, but this is sort of my motivations for doing that. I want to help us get into this next era of what the UMC could be, because I do think we are uniquely positioned to reach the next generation because of our theology, because of our polity, because of our tradition. I think that's something young people are looking for. And so let's actually go build a church, not a young adult church, but a church that is going to meet their needs, to meet them where they are. And it was funny because I remember having a conversation with Stacy Gickcoon in the conference, and she said, well, who do you feel called to reach? What community do you feel called to reach? Where do you feel called to go? I was like, well, Stacy, that's not really how my brain tends to work. Just kind of tell me what my options are and I'll pick the one that I think is best. And she's like, no, that's not how this works. And I'm really glad she said that. She said, I want you to look at the conference map and I want you to pray about where you feel called to go. And so I took that very seriously. And so I looked at the map and I prayed about it and I thought about, okay, if my job is going to be getting fully entrenched in a community, spending my days walking up and down the street and getting to know community leaders and getting to know business owners and getting to talk to just people who live in the area, where would I want to do that? And Sheridan and I, when we moved down here in 2019, we found ourselves gravitating towards the Bishop Arts Oak Cliff area because it reminded us so much of Richmond, Virginia, which is near where we went to college. And so I'm like, man, that was always the place that we loved being. Imagine planning a church down there. And when I started thinking about it, I said, I don't know too much about the community yet, but I would imagine there are a ton of people who are unchurched or dechurched, who are young adults in that early stage of their professional career and young families. That seems like a pretty good place to explore planting this church. And so I continued to have conversations, continue to look more into the community. And then finally I went back to Stacy and I said, it might be a little bit of an unconventional plant, not a fresh expression or anything, but just not your typical suburban church. But I can't help feeling like God is doing something there or calling me there. And we kept having those conversations. And sure enough, I got the call, hey, we got a new appointment for you. Go plant a church down in the Bishop Arts area. And I was surprised, but also just so grateful because again, if God is doing something down there, what an opportunity it is to get to be a part of that. So that's kind of how all of that ended up happening. And yeah, you're right. It was kind of just like all right, I'll raise my hand. I'll go do it. And I pray that God's already down there working.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. Bishop Arts is such a fun, kind of quirky part of the Dallas area, south of downtown, and just has kind of an artsy vibe to it a little bit. And just it's a really cool spot, and I'm excited you're going to be in that part of the town. So you mentioned a little bit ago when you were referring to the pastor you still, or the mentor you still kind of call pastor, about the not forgetting like your own spiritual side. And so as you talk about Gen Z and maybe what they're looking for, like what do you look for? Which I think is hard, right? As a pastor, because like you're playing the pastor role. But when it comes to your spiritual side, what is it that you are actually seeking, and what actually feeds and nourishes your soul, whether as a pastor or just in general? Sometimes, again, I'm saying this because sometimes as a pastor, it's really hard. It's really hard to both lead worship and worship, And so if it's worship, what do you look for? Or beyond worship, where do you find your soul being nurtured?
Yeah, this has been something that I've really been navigating since just having the conversations of church planting. And I'll be honest, this experience, even though it's early on, has shown me, it's going to sound hard to say, but how little I have had to lean on faith in my life. I've had a pretty easy life. I grew up in a great town with a great family and went to college at a great school where I had friends and a support system. And there was very little that I had to go, man, God, if you don't do this, if you don't work in this way, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so when the conversations of, hey, you might go down and church plant, and it might be similar to a parachute plant, it was like, oh gosh, if God's not already working down there, I don't know how this is going to work. And so I found myself on my knees praying more than I have in my entire life. And it's been so great early in this process to see the fruits of that, and leaning less on the strategy and the planning and the organization. I'm an Enneagram 5. So for me, that's the name of my game, man. Like I want to plan, I want to research
all
I
the
want to
things,
have
yeah.
it.
Yeah. Love it.
And I'm of course still doing all that, but I have had to be really disciplined and say, I'm not going to do any of that in my day until I have spent time on my knees in prayer, until I have worshiped in some capacity, and until I've read my scripture. And that has been so good for me to say, this is how I need to lead. I need to lead from faith and allow that to influence what we do. And so this has been a really good opportunity for me to grow in my own faith in order to lead others in their faith well. And so I think it's just going to make me a better pastor. It's going to make me a better Christian myself, because you're right. It can be really hard to lead worship and worship. But I believe this is an opportunity or maybe an experience that God is leading me through that will make me better equipped to serve others in a little bit better capacity.
I love that. And I also have heard in your responses so far in this conversation so far that there's a bit of uncertainty, right? Like there's
a lot of uncertainty.
Right. Let's call it what it is. And you said like it's scary. And I'm not a church planter, but I did start a young adult ministry here in the Austin area. That's a part of my denomination's wider gather network of young adult ministry that's city or region based rather than church specific, because we're seeing the decline of membership and young adults not feeling at home in churches, yada, yada, yada. And it was really scary to start it. And it's still scary now thinking about, well, where are we going? And what are we doing? And is this enough? And is this right? And being faithful to those questions by not trying to answer them myself or
Mm,
our people answering them ourselves, and instead trying to do it collaboratively and through the Spirit, um, is definitely, I think, at least a way of bringing in faith in God to that. But it doesn't necessarily give clarity, because the Spirit sometimes speaks in the burning bush, and then the Spirit sometimes hovers over the waters, and you
yes.
know that's so different. But I don't know anything about Dallas. First one to say, I had to just text my sister-in-law who lives in Dallas. Hey, Monica, where's Bishop Arts and what's the vibe? And she said, oh, we went there, remember? Because we went to a bookstore and like a little shopping district. And so I'm wondering, you seem like a deeply faithful guy. Faith seems really important to you, and you're speaking a language of faith, which is awesome. I would wonder how that might meet maybe more of a secular vibe in an artsy, hipstery, creative, de-churched, maybe skeptical area. Like, do you chameleon a little bit? I don't think so, right? Like, I don't get that vibe from you. Do you speak in code? Do you go unabashedly out there onto the street? Like, do you have any sense yet? Is that the vibe of Bishop Arts? Like a little bit more secular, and maybe you need to adjust to that?
Yeah, well, first I'll say I'm still really early in the learning process. I've been spending my whole days and weeks just sitting at coffee shops and talking to people and trying to learn, because it's really important to me not to plant the church that's in my head, but to plant the church the community needs. And so, yeah, there's some people I talk to and they're like, yeah, this is a very secular, skeptical area. But I'm also learning that there's a huge population of people down there who would identify as Christians, young families, and they want a church to meet their needs. And so, as far as like the secular side of the community, no, I don't think it's being a chameleon. I think it just is meeting them where they are. And it has been so clear early in those conversations how tight knit of a community the Oak Cliff area is. I mean, I'm so excited to be down there and be a part of the community because it's like almost idyllic. People don't tend to, let me say it this way, you don't see what the community of Oak Cliff is in a lot of other places. I mean, it is truly like we've got each other's back. We're investing in each other. It's very small business oriented, shopping local, investing in what other members of the community are doing. And that's great. That to me is good soil for a church. But as far as reaching people who have that mindset, but maybe aren't involved in a church, I think it's going down and serving them so well that you earn their trust. Trust takes time and consistency. So it's going to take more than just going down and opening our doors. And it's going to show a deep level of commitment to saying, what are the issues that this community is facing? And how can we help? I'm not from Oak Cliff. And so for me to go down and just say, well, I know the kind of church you need, that would be foolish. And it's funny because I've heard from people saying, man, this community can sniff an outsider from far away. And so you've got to come in and demonstrate a commitment to serving this community well. Like, I'll give you an example. I was getting coffee yesterday with a gentleman, and he runs a baseball league down there, just like a rec baseball league, kind of a sandlot thing. And he said, I was passing out flyers as I was getting this league started. And I can still tell you the shops around here that wouldn't let me hang a flyer up, even though it was a free thing, even though I invited them to be a part of it. I can still tell you which shops wouldn't let me hang up a flyer, and I have not been back since. Because it showed that they weren't interested in investing in the community beyond what they were doing. And so if we as a church go down there and say, hey, come to our church, and we've got all these great things for you to come into our space and for you to invest in us, that's just not going to work. We need to go down there and show, hey, we are for you. We're here to serve, support, and share the love of God. And that doesn't mean that every person who is unchurched or dechurched or skeptical about organized religion is going to become a member of our church. But prayerfully, it does mean that they'll at least look at our church and say, that is a part of what makes Oak Cliff Oak Cliff.
That's great.
Yeah. It feels like early church, right? Like it feels like what some of the early apostles did, and Paul not just writing to these communities out of no context, but having been a part of them and then continuing to support them from afar.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that there's such deep intentionality. I wasn't doubting that there was, but raising some of those challenging questions. So yeah, if you're in Bishop Arts or other parts of Dallas and you're hungry for some intentional community, maybe check Sean out.
Yeah. We'll give you a chance to do some shameless plugs here in a second, but I feel like I can't make it out of an episode without at least doing one tokenization of young people. So, if there was a chance for you to share, like, on behalf of all young people in the world, no, just kind of from the young person perspective, the young adult perspective, as both a pastor, but also just somebody who cares deeply and is deeply faithful, what is it that you wish people knew about the young adult experience as it pertains to faith?
Man, that's a great question. Don't overcomplicate it. I think a lot of times we spend so much time going, what are young people looking for? And I'm not an expert. I can speak from my experience and from what I hear from other people. But sometimes I think we overcomplicate it so much that we just end up missing the mark. In my experience, what young people are looking for is authenticity. I mean, there's this really interesting dynamic amongst young people where many of them didn't grow up in the church. And so they're coming into church with a clean slate. And all they want to know is, how can I grow? And how can I invest in something that's bigger than myself? And the one thing that I do think is an interesting place for the church of today is, I think the starting point of church is a little bit different. Meaning, yes, what young people are looking for seems to be rich, authentic community and really engaging teaching that gives them a clear call to action. But they also want really good worship. They want good production, and that's not to say moving lights and smoke machines and all of that stuff. But they do want to come in and have that meaningful experience with God. And so I guess my advice, all of that is to say, don't overcomplicate it when it comes to reaching young adults. Do the very best you can. Try to ask yourself, what are they experiencing? What are the challenges that they're facing? And how can we address it? And that's no different than the way you reach any other people. But it just takes the time to have those conversations. Don't just be in a think tank of what young adults, young people are looking for. Just go ask them.
Thanks, Sean. I love that as a fellow young person. And honestly, sometimes just try, right? Don't overthink it. Just try. Which I'm
as the
glad
old
to
person
hear.
here, I support that too. But I'm just
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it will cause you to go, okay, what are the things we need to change? And I know that word change is really scary, but I don't think you'll find that it's a lot of change. I think it's just little things that will speak to that generation and the congregations who are open to truly asking that question and welcoming whatever response they get, that will end up reaching the next generation. Doing the same thing you've always done, if you're not reaching young adults, is not going to work, right? And so being willing to say, what do we need to do? What are they looking for? And what do we potentially need to change, even though change can be really scary?
Mm-hmm. And speaking of a really scary change, we are in the season of Lent, right? This time of preparation in the wilderness, of journeying towards the cross. Sure, with resurrection to come, but first to the scariest, I'd say, most vulnerable and wild part of our faith journey. And what an interesting time to be in transition, right? Like, what an interesting time to be church planting in such a season that I find should, for me, is reflective and full of preparation. You've named your Enneagram 5, so maybe that's up your alley. But do you have Lenten disciplines right now for yourself that are giving you life, or that you are trying to fast or pray or give alms in a certain way? How are you in this season of Lent, and how is it
Mhm.
impacting your call right now?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a church that emphasized Lent very much. I mean, of course, we talked about it and it was part of the liturgical season and everything, but we didn't do Ash Wednesday or anything like that. And so my experience of really seeing this season as a time of preparation is still relatively new for me. Something that I only first started experiencing towards the tail end of my time in college. And so honestly, I still think I'm figuring out all of this season, all of that this season has to offer in terms of growing in your faith and growing closer to God and what that means for when you get to Easter morning. I mean, I've been really reflecting a lot during this year of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. It's really easy for us to get to Easter and focus on the resurrection, and of course, that's the gospel, right? That is the moment. But the other parts of Jesus' experience and time on this earth are also important and crucial and a part of what we call salvation. And so for me in this season of Lent, I've been really focusing on how do all of those things come together to give us an understanding of who Jesus was and what Jesus did. And what does that mean for me, especially in this time? I mentioned Dan Kim at Kenwood UMC, the pastor who served as my mentor in college and I'm still very close with. I gave him a call not too long ago and I said, I have been feeling God convicting me. And I was maybe a bad Methodist because I just think he's growing me and pushing me and causing me to take that next step in my faith. And he's like, it sounds like you're talking about sanctification. It's like, oh yeah, that word that, we lean on so much. Just didn't think about it. And I said, how have you, in those times in your life when you have felt God convicting you and pushing you to grow, what's your response then? He says, when I feel God trying to do something within me, those are the times when I do lean on fasting. Maybe I need to get rid of something in order for God to put something new in me. He's like, you should probably give that a try. And admittedly, I haven't tried it yet, but I fully intend to at some point this Lenten season.
It's also a time of confession, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Just being honest there, that's good.
yeah,
Well,
Dan,
this
if you hear this, I'm sorry. I promise I'll do it.
I love it. And there's a lot of ways to fast too, right? Like there's fasting from food, there's fasting from a lot of things, and I think the thing that I keep reflecting on this Lent has been because I'm more of like a add something in Lent typically, but I was reminded that anytime you add something, you're actually saying no to something else. So even in an adding of whatever your practice might be, like you're still fasting from the decision to do something else. So yeah, it's just a good perspective switch. But as we kind of wrap here, Sean, I'd love again for all of our listeners in Bishop Arts, because I'm sure there's so many of them. I have no idea. I don't know where all of our people are, but if people or just young adults, right? I think a big part of we call it the 77 Collective, with the idea that it is a collective. We want people to connect to one another. So other young adults who might be church planning, right? We kind of joked about like all those young adult church planners out there. Well, the reality is there are some, right? And so for other young adults who might hear this and think, "Gosh, I would love to pick Sean's brain about X, Y, and Z," right? What are good ways for people to find you and get a hold of you and connect with you, whether they're in Bishop Arts or just otherwise?
Yeah. So right now, my email is through Munger Place Church. So I don't know how much longer that'll be active, but it's just Sean, SEAN, at mungerplace.org. But you can find me on social media as well. I've been trying to be a lot better about utilizing my social media. So my TikTok is Reverend Sean McDonald. And then my Instagram is actually Old McDonald 89. But yeah, I mean, I would love to have any conversations with young adults or pastors discerning calls to plant, or even just, I don't know, anybody needing support in times of transition. I love our connectional system. And my prayer is that this feeling that I've been having about moving the UMC into, well, furthering the denomination into this new area, um, that God would be also putting that on other people's heart as well. And so I'm prayerful that we're going to continue to discern where God is calling us as a denomination and as the church universal. I think it's an exciting opportunity with the things that God is doing in the hearts of Gen Z. And I pray that we can be ready for them.
Thanks, Sean. And I'll be praying for you. I mean, that's such a big venture that you're doing. And yeah, I'm glad to hear you have so many amazing supportive mentors, people that you can call and that will fill you and fill your cup. But I appreciate the ways that you're seeking to fill others' cups. And I feel like mine in a way was filled in this conversation. So I'll be keeping you in my prayer over the
Thank you.
weekend. I don't know how we wrap up, Phil. Is that it?
You're doing so
am I
good. Just keep
doing
going.
it?
Yeah, you're doing it so good. Just wrap it right there.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. You know how to reach Sean. I'm sure we'll try to get his stuff in our little
Show
bio
notes.
thing,
Yep.
show notes. And yeah, we're excited to see what happens with this community of faith and Bishop Arts. And so grateful for what you're doing as a young adult, as a person of faith, and as a pastor.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah. Blessings to you, sir. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice, the premier podcast of the 787 Collective. For more information, visit us at 787collective.org or find us on social media. And if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and share a review. For when you do, you are tricking the algorithm for the common good.